Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack for Business podcast. Over 350 episodes strong, we're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game.
Are you struggling to make your business both profitable and purposeful? Wondering if it's possible to do the right thing and still succeed? That's exactly what Shel will unpack in this episode. He'll show you how businesses of any size, from solopreneurs to multinational giants, can grow their bottom line while tackling major global issues like climate change, poverty, inequality. You'll hear how ethical marketing, regenerative strategy, and bold thinking can actually give you a competitive edge. Our guest today is Shel Horowitz from Going Beyond Sustainability, known as a transformpreneur, an international speaker, TEDx presenter, and business strategist who shows companies how to grow profits while healing the world. Well, for over 20 years, Shel has businesses going beyond sustainability by teaching them how to overcome social and environmental challenges like poverty, climate change, and inequality into powerful opportunities for impact and innovation. He's the author of 10 books, including Guerrilla Marketing to Heal the World, and brings decades of activism to his work, having sparked a successful movement to save a mountain that experts have already written off. Now he's writing a new book to empower late-life changemakers. Shel, an absolute pleasure to have you here today, and welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Bernie and Wayne. Great to be here.
You have a favorite quote or saying or tagline you want to work with?
I do. This is by Muhammad Ali. Impossible is just a big word thrown around by small men who find it easier to live in the world they've been given than to explore the power they have to change it. Impossible is not a fact. It's an opinion. Impossible is not a declaration. Dare. Impossible is potential. Impossible is temporary. Impossible is nothing. I built my whole TED talk on that quote.
That is powerful. From a business perspective, what is sustainability, and then what does it mean to go beyond it?
Sustainability, as too often it's defined, is keeping things from getting worse, and regenerativity is making them better. So I'm a big believer in regenerativity, and that means instead of looking to cut your energy use, you might look at how your property might actually put energy into the system, have enough for you to use and have some left over. So that's one among many examples, but you're looking for really systemic thinking that could take you into a deeper, better level of what we generally think of as sustainability.
Shel, I know that you're very proud of is how you saved a mountain. Not everyone can save a mountain, but Shel saved a mountain. Tell me a story.
Okay. November 1999, I was reading my local paper, and on the front page, there was an article about a developer who was going to put 40 big luxury homes going all the way up the mountain from the road to the ridge line. I had just moved 2 months earlier into this neighborhood. I read this like, that doesn't sound like a good idea. And then I read later in the article where a lot of the environmental experts were saying, oh, this is terrible, but there's nothing we can do. And that's when I did more than say, this is not a good idea. Of course, there's something we can do, and I'm going to prove it. So I started a movement called Save the Mountain. And I thought that we would have 20 people at the first meeting, and we would have a core group of 5 or 6 people who'd really want to get involved, and that we would make the developer's life uncomfortable for probably about 5 years, and he would withdraw the proposal. Well, 70 people showed up to the meeting. 30 more called me and said, I want to be involved. By the end of the night, we had several operating committees and a working group of about 35. So right from the gate, we had shattered all the expectations I had. I thought it would take us 5 years. We got very busy and got involved on multiple different fronts: endangered species, water resources, the impact on the state park right next to it, on and on. Just 13 months later, that project was dead. Most of the land was taken over by the state park next door, and we had a victory. And it was actually that victory which used everything that I knew about marketing in an activist campaign that got me to ask, what if I could take some lessons from the activist world into the business community? And that led directly to the work I've been doing these last 25 years in really looking at how business can be a force for social change and environmental good.
So, Farrell, working from the land developer's perspective, how do you convince somebody? It's far better if you're not having a tug of war
Yeah.
and someone dropped money in there. Once somebody drops money into a game, whether it's right or wrong, they tend to be a little more committed. They put skin in the game. How do you help somebody go, I've got an idea, I've got the money to do it, but is it a good idea? And how do you shape it so that everybody walks away a winner without it being a catastrophic event?
Well, the interesting thing, Bernie, in this particular case, he hadn't actually bought the property yet. So we were able to interfere at that level. He did have some sunk costs in terms of the planning that went into it. And he had made an offer that had been accepted to the landowner to buy this piece of land for far less than it was worth. Our lawyers worked out a deal with a philanthropist who was excited by our work that she donated money for the state to buy the land out from under the developer, paying the landowner twice as much. So the landowner was extremely happy. The developer, as you can imagine, was not happy, but the town was very, very happy, and the county was very, very happy. It was the most exciting organizing I've ever done, because it's the only time I've ever really been in a consensus movement where everybody in the area agreed, except for the developer and like 5 of his friends, that this was the wrong project in the wrong place. And he quickly realized that he was not going to have the support he needed to move forward. But what we didn't even know, most of us in the core group, except the ones working directly with the lawyers, did not know that these negotiations were taking place. He announced in November, we basically won in March, but I didn't even know until the following December that we had won, and the rest was all about how to make it work. So it was incredibly quick. I did feel sorry for him that he lost some thousands of dollars in the preliminary stuff that he had to do, but I didn't feel real sorry for him. We actually decided that he was our honorary fundraising chair because the local paper did a big interview with him in which he said, well, I'm going to ruin my view of the mountain too, but it's worth it because I'll make a lot of money. And we got dozens of small check contributions in the 10 days following the publication of that article, which helped us fund our lawyers who helped make this deal happen. But I agree with you that in general, you want to try for the win-win-win. In this case, one win got left out, and that was the developer. The landowner didn't have all his ducks in a row. If he had bought the land already, it would have been much harder. I look for ways, like if you're in a corporate setting and want to make a case for the green and social justice initiatives, you have to make that case not just on, oh, this will help people. I mean, that's nice, that's good. But if you're talking to bean counters, you have to talk bean counter language. So you will reduce costs, you will raise revenues, plus raise revenues means higher profits. Business people like that argument. And it's almost always true. Look at the least tree hugger company I can think of, Walmart. I don't shop there because I disagree with a lot of the things they do in terms of store siting, labor practices, and other things. But I love what they did with making their supply chain, their practices, their vehicle fleet much more environmentally friendly. They didn't do it to be nice. They did it because it either made them or saved them a boatload of money. By doing all the environmental things they did, they slashed their energy costs. They got into marketing green products such as organic food and low energy light bulbs. Years ago, I discovered that Walmart was actually selling more organic food than Whole Foods. And the really interesting thing was that the people who were buying organic food at Walmart ain't never going to go to Whole Foods. So they had basically doubled the entire market for organic produce by going after the Mississippi truck drivers and farm laborers who don't shop at Whole Foods. And I applaud them for that. They monetized this very, very well. And they monetized the fuel savings. And so they're on both ends. They're selling more stuff and not spending as much on resources. That's a pretty compelling argument.
I'm guessing you hang with some people that question your ideological purity, that you're not wet enough for them. What made you want to circle the square, and what made you think business was the right solution to an ideological problem or challenge?
I don't present myself as someone who is ideologically pure, and I'm not ideologically pure. I eat mostly organic and local foods, but I do eat foods grown through chemiculture. I live in a green building, but there are things I could do to make it greener. We're exploring some of that right now. So I don't claim to be thou shalt not do any evil whatsoever. But what I'm doing is using perfection as a process, not as an established fact. So here in the US, I know you folks are Canadian, but in one of our founding documents talks about in order to form a more perfect union. So I have tried to form a more perfect lifestyle and to help other people make more perfect lifestyles and more perfect businesses. I'm not coming in like, you have to do this or else. I'm also not saying the sky will fall if you don't do it. But I'm saying here's the solid business case for making things better in terms of hunger, poverty, racism, classism, ageism, sexism, homophobia, catastrophic climate change, peace instead of war. And here's the business case for it. Here's how it will help you gain more customers who will pay you more while lowering your costs. And the reason I chose business as my venue for this is they respond to that cost-benefit analysis. They have the resources to make it happen. I can never do what Walmart is doing because I don't have tens of thousands of suppliers that I can tell your packaging has to be 80% reduced or we're not going to buy from you. They do. I make my quill order once or twice a year and I spend $100, and that's not going to change anybody's mind about what kinds of products they're going to make. The big companies have that leverage, and interestingly enough, they're recognizing it. I think it was 2019, I went to something called the Responsible Business Summit. And I was not a speaker, but I was moderating two panels. One of them was Pirelli, the tire company, and two other companies I don't remember. And the other was Coca-Cola in a solo panel. Other people at the conference presenting included all the major car makers, Timberland shoes, big companies. The message from all of them is we are not doing this to be goody-goody. We are doing this because it's darn good for our business. And the nice thing about that is that when you make that kind of case, it withstands the pressure to cut during hard times, whether it's economic times or, as we have in the United States right now, political times. It's very hard to sit there and say, we're going to go back to those old polluting, expensive ways and we'll have to double our budget to do it. Business owners aren't going to do that.
Makes sense. It's interesting. You talked about large entities, right? Large businesses, not typically agile, but they have the resources to make the agility happen. They can make it happen super fast too. But if you're a small business and you're starting out and going, I'm here, you just popped up one day and I'm going to make widgets or I'm going to sell the widgets, whatever the piece of the puzzle that it is. How do you find that, okay, got the concept, I know I have an audience or I have a client base for it. Now, how do I make sure that what I'm doing is as gentle and purposeful as possible and has good yield? And then how do I leverage that? You talked about guerrilla marketing too.
So the first thing is that I am about the smallest business you can have. I am one person working out of my farmhouse. I have no big infrastructure, no employees. I have usually one or two virtual assistants at a time doing specific tasks, and everything else is me. I certainly understand the challenges of running a very small business and getting noticed in a crowded marketplace. One of my books actually has the subtitle, Getting Noticed in a Noisy World. We solopreneurs and very tiny businesses, and that's most of my client load, are people who have 10 employees or fewer. Occasionally I'll get a company that's got 40 or 50 employees. We have that agility. We can do the little guerrilla things to have an impact. A lot of it is positioning. I have written for my clients many press releases. I had a client once who had a book on electronic privacy. If you follow pretty much any how to write a press release book, you're going to come out with a lead something like electronic privacy expert releases book. So I write headlines that don't put people to sleep. The headline I wrote for him was, I don't know if you remember that old "It's 10 o'clock, do you know where your children are" PSA from way back in the day. Wayne remembers. So my headline was, "It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your credit history is?" And I talked about how it might be vacationing in big data banks of huge corporations without your knowledge. The book showed up in paragraph 3. If I were writing that press release today, I would probably focus on identity theft. But at that time, identity theft was not what was on people's minds. So I went with the topic that people were going to relate to. Similarly, with a social enterprise, I have a client who makes tiny little solar lamps, powered LEDs, the size of a cell phone. For her, we looked at all the different market segments she could go into, from nightlights for kids to camping, to emergency disaster response when there is no power, and many other things. For each of these things, we spun out the business case for how this could be an effective tool in your toolbox. That was really fun to do.
What was the calling you came up with? What was the one hit?
It wasn't a one hit. It was different approaches for different audiences. One size fits all is a huge mistake. I can't wear the same size pants that my kid does. My kid is much skinnier. For you, in this situation, you would write one press release for the camping market, a different press release for the parent of very young children market, another one for disaster response. Oh, you can take the system anywhere you go. It fits in your pocket. You can have light in places you couldn't have it before. One of the things we didn't get to do, I suggested at one point to her that she really have a contest for like who can come up with the most outrageously interesting, fascinating new uses for this project. Let that then dictate some new markets she could go into.
I wouldn't do a podcast with you if I didn't give you this one opportunity for a soapbox. Can you tell me what are one of the misconceptions people have about using ethics or using regeneration, even in that corporate world? What's one big misconception?
Well, since you mentioned two, I'll give you two, one in each. Okay, so in ethics, the concern is I have to be ruthless. Otherwise, my competitors will be ruthless and they'll push me out of business. And that's just nonsense. The reality is people don't want to work with a ruthless company. They want to work with a company that's going to be nice to them. They want to feel like a human being who is respected, maybe even valued in the relationship. And so it's much easier to market. I think about Nordstrom, would you rather shop in a Nordstrom where they will go out of their way to make things right, even if it wasn't really their problem to begin with? Or would you rather go in some big, let's just say a government bureaucracy and then try to get something done? Well, that's not responsible. It's not a problem. You have to talk to them on the fourth floor. Like, yes. You would voluntarily go back to that? No. So monopolies can get away with that, but these days monopolies are few and far between. The old monopolies have mostly been replaced by what I'll call polyopolies. We now have many more solutions to a particular problem than we have the internet, which can help us find them. So it's a very, very different world. We don't have to do business with the bastards anymore. So that's on the ethics side. And then as far as the regenerativity side, the big misconception that people have is that it's too expensive. I say, if you look at all of your costs, if you stop externalizing the things that you're really paying for, it's cheaper. It's all about resource use. If you use fewer resources, you spend less money. There is a higher demand flexibility in pricing with green and socially conscious products and services. People will pay more for them up to a degree. If you're double the price of your non-green competitor, you're probably not going to do too well. But if you're 10%, 15% higher, people will not notice, or they'll be willing to pay the premium because they want to do good in the world. Most people want to be thought of as good people. So if you have a choice and you're paying the same, let's just say $5 for a product that is paying its workers fairly and treating them well versus one that is putting absurd, obnoxious demands on its employees and making a very uncomfortable climate to work actually really poorly, where are you going to put your dollars? So if you can buy in the ice cream world, for example, it's probably more like $6 than $5. The two probably biggest known super premium ice cream companies in the world are Haagen-Dazs and Ben & Jerry's. So why would you buy from cold corporate Haagen-Dazs if right on the next shelf is a pint of Ben & Jerry's that you know is going to help them put people with cognitive disabilities into positions in their scoop shops, is going to be funding solar initiatives, etc.? Now, if it was $5 versus $10, that wouldn't be a good sell. But if it's $6 versus $6.10, who cares?
It sounds like there's a couple things afoot here. First off, you have to be aware of what the issues are. And sometimes, again, if I'm going to go back to the solopreneur, I'm now making widgets or selling the widgets. Okay, I've got my business oxygen to keep the business running. How do I tune into, is it the packaging I'm using or supporting something or treating people a certain way or sourcing materials that are more acceptable, least damaging source? How do you find that? Is there a manual that says, good deeds done, open up the book? Is it a bit of a fairy book or is there a source that goes, hi? Or is it best practices and proven for positive outcomes? Is that any different than, let's say, the soccer club, baseball team, or football team? Here are the jerseys. Have at it.
That's a multi-part question.
You're welcome, Shel. You are absolute.
First of all, there are many books. One of them I wrote, that's Guerrilla Marketing to Heal the World. And there are many others. Blue Economy 3.0 is one that actually they do have the blueprints for manufacturers and other kinds of specific companies to do these things. Bernie, it's all of them. You don't necessarily have to do them all at once. You do them in the low-hanging fruit order. So the ones that are easiest for your particular company to implement, that is going to be different for every company. It's something I can help with. Is, okay, here is the obvious place where this minor intervention that is only going to cost you $200 to implement is going to save you $10,000 a month. Do that one first. And then use some of the money you're saving to do the next one and the next one after that. We talked about perfection as a process. If you try to do it all at once, you'll probably do none of it and fail. But if you look for the next big manageable chunk that's going to make a significant impact input, one of these days I might get around to writing a book called The Fulcrum Principle. The idea that a small amount of leverage can create great change.
So just in follow-up to that, if someone goes, okay, I'm going to do the right thing, do you market that element, or is it
Absolutely.
Or is it sometimes you just, if I donate money to somebody, it's to donate for impact. If I personally donate to a charity, it's not a big fanfare. Bernie gave $50 to the food bank this week as opposed to for the business. Is there a balance to that?
There's a balance. There's, I'm Jewish, and in the Jewish tradition, the highest form of charity is anonymous donation. But that's very different from a company doing its marketing. So one of my favorite examples here is a recycled household paper products company, that is to say napkins, toilet paper, towels, called Markel. Markel is a regional brand in the Northeast United States. I grew up with it as a New York City kid. They were early to the game when Markel switched to recycled paper. Any guesses, Wayne or Bernie?
1961.
Oh, you're much closer than most people.
Well, I guess when the suppliers were starting to get cost at a premium, and they were probably looking for an easier resource and reduce costs. When? Oh, I would say probably the 70s.
Yeah, well, Bernie, you're not as close as Wayne. It was 1950, 50. Now, I was -7. And
diapers are few and far between.
They didn't tell anybody. Now, I understand in the 1950s that, you're a New York City area household paper products company, and you might not necessarily like to tell the story of, oh, we're making toilet paper out of your old junk mail. But by about 1975, it would have been a marketing advantage. And they didn't tell people for another 30 years. They went bankrupt, and they brought in a turnaround strategist. And one of the first things that guy noticed was like, you've been recycling since longer than most of your customers have been alive, and that's an asset, and you act like it doesn't exist. So he completely rebranded. He talked about small steps, saving trees, saving 1 million trees. Sales shot up. They went from bankruptcy. Within 1 year, they were the hottest selling recycled household paper products brand in the country. And they're a regional brand. You can't get them in California. You can't get them in Texas. They were outselling seventh generation just by paying attention to the asset that they had already had for more than 50 years. Oh, brilliant. But why did it take them so long to figure that out? I got to tour the Markel factory. That was fun.
One thing that I have a very low tolerance of is hypocrisy. Sometimes I find companies greenwash. And I was wondering, what do you do when your BS meter is flipped? And how actively do you call them on it? And how?
One of the worst examples of greenwashing is the entire nuclear power generation industry. That is one of the dirtiest industries you will find, and they pretend it's clean. We are almost 40 years after the accident at Chernobyl in Ukraine. That land is still uninhabitable. How could you be green if you destroy a huge piece of your country when something goes wrong? How could you be green if your waste products need to be isolated from the environment for 220,000 years? Friggin' clue on how to do that. So that entire industry is an example of greenwashing. My first book was about why nuclear power is a really stupid idea, and I've only given you 2 of a dozen reasons. That book actually, after Fukushima, the other huge, massively damaging accident that everybody's heard of, there's 100 more that you probably haven't heard of that were not catastrophic but could easily have become so. A Japanese publisher came to me and said, we want to bring that book back into print. Like, really? It's 30 years old. And they said, yeah. And I said, how about if you let me write a new introduction to it to make it relevant 2011? And they actually paid me more than I got for writing the book in the first place, which was kind of cool. I wrote a 10 or 12 page introduction to the Japanese edition of Nuclear Lessons. The research I did at that time showed that all of the problems were still there. In fact, some of them had gotten worse. This company says, oh, we're carbon free, which isn't actually true. And we're a green alternative, which isn't true at all. Much of my activism over my life, I was involved in something called the Clamshell Alliance back in 1977. That act sparked the United States safe energy movement and to some degree, some of the global movement. Back after that action, we took over the construction site of the Seabrook nuclear power plant for a couple of days. 1,414 of us got arrested and were incarcerated for 2 weeks in National Guard armories. And we used those as what I call universities within walls. Everybody in there had something they could teach and something to learn. We had classes and workshops and made friends with the poor 19-year-old kids who were charged with our care, who had no clue about any of these bigger issues, and started proselytizing to them. And we took full advantage of our time in the armories. When we came out, we discovered that a national movement had been born. I am convinced that the reason we heard about 3 Mile Island is because of Clamshell Alliance. We didn't hear about Browns Ferry, Alabama in 1975 or Enrico Fermi in Michigan in 1966, really scary nuclear accidents. But because there was no mass movement against nuclear power at that point, they disappeared into the ether where news items that don't get covered go. I'm still an activist. Our governor here in Massachusetts is trying to bring nuclear into the mix. I haven't written my piece about that yet, but it's on my to-do list to write about why that is wrong. Over the years, I've published many letters and op-eds on this topic. That's where my energy goes. In the world of chemical-based agriculture, there's a lot of greenwashing. The company that makes Roundup tries to pretend that's a green product. It is not. You definitely have to do your due diligence. When somebody says, we're organic, how come I don't see an organic certification? I see that it says all natural. All natural has no legal meaning. Organic has a legal meaning that no chemical pesticides, fertilizers, and such were used to grow that for the previous 3 years on that land. I will shop locally with farmers who say we do organic practices, but we're not certified. Because I understand that not every mom and pop farm can spend a significant amount of money to get that certification. But I also know that I can pop into their farm and see if it's true. I can drive by there, and if I see a tractor spraying in the field, like, whoa, what's going on here?
Is there a lesser of two evils scenario? The reason you have a nuclear power plant is you need electricity.
Yeah.
And if you have the need for electricity, there's a demand for it. Is it any better than a coal power plant? It's not to challenge the idea that is nuclear bad or not, but you have the need for electricity, especially you have people saying electric cars are the way to go. And that might be more of a mixed bag of things. So there's several issues. So without getting into the energy dynamics, the energy density and so forth, but you can come across something and, we need it. Like, for example, you can't cut oil out of everything. So how do you, if you're coming up with something, how do you find that balance? I'm trying to minimize the impact, but at the same time, I still need something that's not so good.
All right. I'm going to give you a fairly long answer that starts with an anecdote. I don't know if this anecdote is true. What I have heard is that in the 50s and 60s, when they were starting the space program, U.S. engineers were tasked with trying to invent a pen that could write upside down in space in zero gravity. And they spent millions of dollars and hundreds of hours developing something that would do the trick. Meanwhile, the USSR handed out pencils. So often what we think of as the solution is one among many solutions. The US engineers in NASA only thought about pens. They didn't think that the goal is to write something on a piece of paper and that we already had a perfectly good zero gravity writing instrument. So in the same way, your goal is not to make electricity. Your goal is to power the factories and stores and the warehouses and to keep houses warm and cool and the right temperature and to all that stuff. You're looking at what you wanted to accomplish. And then you start looking at what is the best way to accomplish it. So here's an interesting fact. More solar energy falls on the Earth every hour than humans use in a year. So the problem is not we need nuclear. The problem is we haven't figured out how to deploy these incredible riches of solar and wind and geothermal and magnetic and all the rest of the really clean sources out there. And we have figured these things out. We just haven't figured out how to do enough of them to displace the dirty technologies we've been using for 200 years. But we absolutely have the knowledge of how to do it. There is a brilliant man named Amory Lovins who has been writing about this stuff since 1975. He built a house for himself in Old Snowmass, Colorado, which is just outside Aspen. Aspen, you may know, is an entire resort city built on cold weather. It's a downhill ski capital. So without snow, there is no skiing. And without cold weather, there is no snow. So you have this entire regional economy based on it being cold. His house doesn't have a furnace, is warm enough inside to grow bananas, is comfortable all year round, is 4,000 square feet. I don't know what that is in meters, but it's a big house. When I heard him speak in 2001, he said that his residential electric bill, not counting the office part of his dwelling, was $5 a month. Now, okay, there's been some inflation, so let's say it's $50 a month. I pay considerably more than that for electricity, and I have a 1 kilowatt solar on my roof and methane heat from the farm I live on. And yet, his attention to holistic design blew my house out of the water in terms of energy conservation. What would the world be like if all of the housing stock built since 1984 had followed those principles? Well, I don't think the U.S. would have gone to war in Iraq, for one thing. That's an enormous savings of energy, material, human lives, archaeological relics, and all the rest of it that could have been avoided. It's not that we necessarily, if people get very hooked on specific solutions, but when you look at goals instead of solutions, better paths often emerge. We don't need nuclear power. When we think we need nuclear power, we then divert resources that could be used for rapid transition to solar and wind and all those other cool green technologies work. Nuclear power has a poor reliability record, an abysmal safety record. As I mentioned, there have been more than 100 potentially catastrophic, supposedly once-in-a-century accidents in the 60 years or so that the nuclear industry has existed. We have no place to put the garbage. And the other thing is that the cycles to build and get permitting for and get online with a nuclear power plant are usually multiple decades, which means by the time you get this plant online, the technology is completely obsolete. And they keep saying, oh, the next generation will be better. Well, they said that about the Gen 2 reactors. The Gen 2 reactors are horrible. And the Gen 3 and 4 reactors are unproven because they're still the most recent plants to go online in the United States. There were, I think, 2 that went on in the last 10 years. There was a long pause where no new nukes came, and that was following the Seabrook. So we lost that battle. But then for 40 years, no more nuclear power plants were going up. And just in the last few years, this 1 or 2 plants did go online, and they were Gen 2 reactors. They were designed in the 70s. We know now that was terrible technology, really dangerous. But it was considered the next big thing back then, the thing that would solve all the problems of the Gen 1 reactors. Didn't solve any of the problems of them. Fukushima and 3 Mile Island were Gen 2 reactors. Chernobyl wasn't even that.
Is there a modeling? Although we're touching on nuclear and some of us have a good understanding of it. Let's say you're coming up with a widget that might have issues to be a solution towards a goal. Is there some sort of modeling that bounces back and forth like a sorting hat going, yes, this sounds fantastic. Here are your pros and cons. Is there some sort of modeling process that helps someone come out with a better path? It's not a straight line. You have to do a few zigs and zags and you have less impact, but a better yield.
Well, that sounds like a perfect task for AI to play with. And I want to say one other thing we've not talked about in this discussion of energy, which again is something of a tangent from issue of businesses going green. But I want to say one more thing, and that's the energy, what Emery Lovins calls negawatts, that we don't use, our best source of energy. It was only like 15, 20 years ago that most light bulbs were incandescents and the rest were old style fluorescents. Now we have LED bulbs that use roughly 1/10, 1/20th of the energy to produce the same quality of light. And they've gotten really good. We did our kitchen over in 2013, and by then we could get really nice lights that were LEDs. 10 years earlier, they were pretty horrible. They were flickery, they were the wrong color. But we figured that out. If you have a high ceilinged warehouse where to change the light bulb, you have to send out a worker with a bucket loader that can actually raise that worker to the level of the ceiling to unscrew the light bulb. Even back in the days when the LED light bulbs were $10 a piece and now they're like 89 cents, the issue was not the cost of the light bulb. The issue was the cost of the labor for the person to go out there in the bucket loader and the cost of running the bucket loader and keeping it maintained. So if you have 50 light bulbs in your ceiling and you go from the incandescent that needs to be replaced annually to the LED that I'm still using all but one of the LED lights we put in 2013. One of them burned out this year. You know, you're saving 9 trips with the bucket loader for every light bulb. And that person can be using that time for something more productive. So the costs, I did some math on this, and even at the time, LED lights were $10 each, and I think it came out to like a $400,000 savings a year if you had 50 light bulbs. Which is unbelievable. You have to think differently, holistically. You have to look at how one solution might solve multiple problems. That was something Lovins did in that amazing house. He told me there was one arch that did 12 different things. When we think intelligently about design, we come up with very different answers. My favorite design instructor is Mother Nature. Whatever engineering challenge we come up with, she's figured it out already. You want to know how to build really good bridges? Ask a spider. You want to know how to get water in dry climates? Ask a Namib desert beetle. It's just astounding how much richness there is in natural engineering technology. You want air conditioning? Ask termites. They invented it millions of years ago.
So one thing that you're very aware of is the power of demographics. And you want to empower late life learners, late life change makers to do some things that I think is pretty fresh. Can you tell me more?
I am currently in the early stages of what I hope will be book number 11. And it's going to be a book for elders who want to be activists. It is called Showing Up and Stepping In, The Older Person's Guide to Raising Hell and Changing the World in Your 60s, 70s, and Beyond. My hope is that I will be partnering with an elders activist organization called Third Act, and that they will say, we want to have our name on this book and we want to share it with our, I don't know how many hundreds, thousands of members they have. If they turn me down, which I don't think they will, I'm expecting to get a yes there if I find the right person to talk to, I will go to AARP, which has 15 million people, but they're not all my audience. Whereas Third Act, every single person who's a member is a good candidate to either buy the book for themselves or buy it for a friend. If I got 1% of 15 million, that's still a very nice number. And once I have the sponsoring organization in hand, I know it would be a two-way sponsorship because they'd probably get donated a portion of the proceeds. Then I go to a publisher and say, hey, look, I've got 500,000 people in an organization that's endorsing this book. I think finding a publishing deal will be pretty easy. And this is the kind of systemic thinking about marketing that I encourage my clients to do and that I help businesses do. Looking at that bigger picture and looking at the goals and not necessarily the rote solutions that we've always done it this way. We have to keep doing it. Well, no, you don't.
So are you finding that like the 60s there was a lot of activism then, right? The flower power, all that came to be. Are you finding that is not isolated to that period of time, but it's still active? Does it come in cycles? Has it always been there? It just gets quiet and then it gets more prominent? Has that activism always been alive and well over the years? Through all the generations. So if you've lived in the 60s, you might kick up the noise on something. But are you finding that the younger generations were in their teens, 20s, and 30s still alive and well?
Absolutely. And it goes back long before the 60s. I was mentored in the 70s, in my early activist years, by people who'd been active in the 30s and 40s. They were in turn mentored by people who were active in the early 1900s, who were mentored by people in the second half of the 19th century, who were mentored by activists around slavery before the Civil War, and on it goes. You can trace nonviolent civil disobedience back to the Old Testament, to the book of Exodus, to the story of Shiphrah and Puah, the two midwives who refused to kill the Hebrew babies and went to the Pharaoh and said, we're so sorry, Pharaoh, but these women, they won't wait for us. They have their babies before we even get there. That's, as far as I know, the oldest recorded instance of civil disobedience. 3,000 years ago. When I go to demonstrations these days, I see a lot of gray hairs like me. I was really too young for the 60s. I had just turned 13 when the 60s ended. I have met people. I met one guy online during the pandemic who became an activist at 6. I know 2 women who were still activists on their 100th birthdays, 3 years apart. One of them, she's so funny. Like, what do you want for your 100th birthday, Francis? I want a demonstration with 100 people holding signs for 100 causes marching through the streets of Northampton, Massachusetts. She got 300. She was too impatient to wait for the police escort and told the people pushing her wheelchair, start now. And so the mayor and our state senator, who happened to be in the demonstration, stepped out to stop traffic so that the demonstration could get across. And 300 people with 300 signs for 300 causes. One woman used her 100th birthday party to make a pitch for her charity. And she was still so with it that people would say something and she would just zing out a one-liner in response, totally unrehearsed, and totally boom, that was the zinger. And she did that 4 or 5 times in her 10-minute speech. You're never too old, you're never too young to be a change maker. Look at Malala. She was 11 when she became an activist. She was the youngest person ever to win a Nobel Prize. She was still in her teens. I get a lot of inspiration from younger people are really great at creating new tactics. They are digital natives, which I am not. I didn't get my first computer till I was well into my 20s. They have a different way of viewing the world and have done some amazing things. I think of groups like the Sunrise Movement and Extinction Rebellion, and there are groups even for younger people. There's this young woman in my area who started a local branch of the Young Feminist Party. She was in high school, and she's one of the most effective organizers I've ever come across. And she's a great speaker. I've heard her speak at several rallies. And I don't think she's 20 yet, and she's been doing this for several years.
Shel, if this resonates with you as a listener and you want to talk to you, What's the easiest way to get a hold of you?
Visit goingbeyondsustainability.com and fill out the contact form. My phone number's on the site also, 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. U.S. Eastern. The number is my landline. I'm fairly private about my cell phone number, so you may not get me in because I'm often out, but that's why we have voicemail. Although you'd be surprised at how many people call and don't leave a message. Find me on LinkedIn. I sometimes let them pile up for a few days, but I do get to my LinkedIn messages.
I want to say thank you to Shel Horowitz, Wayne Pratt, being the co-host, and you, the Knack for Business listeners. Really appreciated this conversation. It's enlightening and good to hear how to make a difference in the world. Whether it's saving a mountain that experts are already given up, to guiding companies towards regenerative success, Shel is the person to reach out to. He can help you find that message, whether it's your company or maybe you have a point to raise and it's a problem in your space. I want to say thank you, Shel.
It's been a pleasure. And yes, I work with companies and people individually on all of this to help you find your particular sweet spot.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KRATISIH.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motive8u.ca, that is MOTE, the numeral 8 and the letter U.ca, or his website, motive8u.a. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people. Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert. Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host. Jovan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space. Then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner, and Wayne Pratt from Motive 8U Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer. Please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.